The Dalton-Chekhov Archives present the MCIW 1992. Berlin. This was the first of a series of Michael Chekhov International workshops that led the expansion now radiating across the world. We hope you find beauty in the rough footage, can be at ease with the soft murmurs of the translators in the audience, and find entirety in the partial form of this conversation on imagination with Mala Powers, Hurd, Hatfield, and Jobst Langhans.
So I can only tell you what I remember of what he said. The order, I honestly don't know. He would ask us to hold an image. He would give us like man in black, woman in green, boy with golden hair, and then ask us visually, close our eyes and see as many details as possible just on this theme, so that we would see exactly what this character, this person, this man in black, woman in green, boy with golden hair, looked like, exactly what they were wearing, exactly what the body looked like. And to ask questions. For example, if you hold, if you hold the picture, you see certain things. First, maybe just a very indistinct, or maybe you just see the arrangement of the hair. And now you ask, yeah, but what do his shoes look like? And now, almost like a zoom camera, your imagination takes you to the feet. And sometimes it's clear immediately, and other times you must wait for the image. And it may be very different from the way your, if you were sitting down figuring out costuming, for example, you might dress him very differently from what appears to you in your imagination. Do you want to translate? I'm getting way ahead.
No, but I think was if somebody has a question, we can translate it. Yes. Did you do any exercises before you started with this, or you just jumped in it?
Just jumped in it?
Just jumped in it.
The other aspect was that some people worked better on their feet. And an interesting thing came out of this. I think it's getting maybe too complicated because I don't know if it's the way Chekhov taught. It was only experiences with it. Maybe it should come, this should come at the end. After we finish this imagination, this is like our little side thing. But anyway, that's the other exercise that he gave us was really is an exercise of Rudolf Steiner's, which is to take your memories during the day or the day before and recall a person that you saw or talked to or knew or didn't know, and remember exactly how they looked. And then he said, if you cannot remember what color their shirt was, you just choose. give them whatever color shirt you want, but you fill in the complete picture. And that was basically, those were basically the exercises that he gave us.
When I was privileged to work on the book, the original book, The Actor, which was very changed from my concept as a young devotee of Chekhov, it came out in a much drier form because I was acting in the company in 3 roles and I couldn't, sadly, go on with the writing. But one of the chapters that is lost, I don't know if it's in the Moscow Art Theater Archives, I don't know what it is, was a chapter on imagination and incorporation. I don't know what that word is in German. Yeah, you understand, verstehen. To imagine, as Mala was saying, an image, but not only imagine, you have to become that image. Now, I was working on Don Quixote, and I hope I don't look like Don Quixote. I don't think so. But here I am, Hurd Hatfield, mere actor, mortal, and I want to become this strange character. So we did these exercises that Mala points out, in which the actor imagines the image, and you see it, and you see it, and you have found maybe the will, the objectives, you found the atmosphere of the character, you have maybe found a center, but sometimes it's hard to find just what does he look like. And I had a little trouble, and I said to Misha, to Mr. Chekhov, I said, I have trouble seeing the external part of it. And he told me a wonderful story, you know, from the ridiculous to the sublime. When he was working on Hamlet, he had trouble with all of his gifts. He couldn't see physically how Hamlet looked. And he said one night, he woke from half sleeping, and he saw beside his bed this complete figure, what the face was like, what he was wearing, and so forth. And that substantiated, underlined the fascination that I had and still do with a world of independent images, which he believed. And I wasn't quite sure, you know, I was young, I was confused, and I came more and more to realize that this is an absolute truth. And Jung, I think I mentioned this in one of my conferences, in his brilliant psychological analysis, speaks of the world of archetypes, of images that disturb the actor. Now, some of that is still in the book. I recognize a little bit of my writing there about Michelangelo, who couldn't sleep because the Sistine Chapel in Adam, these extraordinary figures, they disturbed him. He said, they don't leave me alone. And that is the awakened imagination that is wished for, that you are so involved with the part that these things come and they help you. I had no idea that I had comedic gifts, comedy. I was always picking something serious, dark luster. And suddenly, someone had to leave the company, and I had to substitute for Imagery in Twelfth Night, which is an idiotic man, ageless, with no brain at all. And I got some signal, I don't know what it was. In other words, something helped me, and I was able to play him in every situation. I didn't have to think, you know, which is deadly with the brain. The instinct of this idiotic character took me by the nose everywhere. It was as if I had a figure, an image. Now, that wasn't anyone I ever saw in the streets, though you can use whatever you see. The actor must be observant. And Chekhov said, sometimes something comes to us, we are helped in some way. Now that may sound very mystical, but I know it's true, and I believe it, and I think that that frees the actor from the idea that he is very finite, and that the Stanislavski point of view that became old-fashioned. Am I going too fast? That the actor's studio, which I did not approve of some of that teaching, stuck with this sense memory, which we discussed. He abandoned that. He dealt with the imagination, that everything is possible to the artist, the actor, if his technique is ready. It's no good to imagine Quixote if you can't transform your body, if you can't be taller, if you can't take on whatever it is you're doing. You must have the flexibility to be taller, to have your center up there. All of that must be exercised, but the imagination is the Lord and the Master that gives us these wonderful wings that are beyond our small, limited self. Long speech.
Just one. Yeah, yes.
You can translate that. Does everyone understand? Did I go too fast? Verstehen?
There's one point Chekhov has been talking about, that you try to imaginate and incorporate the character.
Yeah.
You have to get off this character too afterwards. I remember. I don't know. Yes. How do you get off this?
You stop it. You stop it. Yeah. He said you'd go mad.
Okay.
When I read this the first time, I had the picture that you imagine the character in front of you, for example, and then you went into it like you
become it.
Yes?
taking clothes, and then you take it off, but it stays there.
There's two things I'm not sure which you are referring to. Like, when the performance is over, you let go of the character before you go home? Or are you talking about in the rehearsal process, let's say you're working for an imaginary body. I'm working for a character whose neck is much longer than mine. And in order to make sure I have this, I rehearsed many times very consciously for this long neck. And all of a sudden, one time, I already have it. It's already, but I don't have to concentrate anymore. So I think I haven't got it. And I go on trying to have a long neck or thinking about it. And then he would say to me, darling, you have it, let go of it. So that's, to me, that's a very, one of the hardest stages is to know when what you have been working for, concentrating upon, is yours. And now to just trust it and not concentrate anymore. So there's two different things, and I don't know for sure which question you asked.
Yes, I just wanted to understand what did he mean getting off the character? What really was meant?
If it's after a performance, yes, you just step out of it. I just step out of it. Sometimes I kiss the character and then step out.
And also, I remember he said that it's dangerous for the actor to be so obsessed with what he's doing that he can't let it go. Because he had such an intense nature, and he had difficulties in Russia mentally at some point, which I don't think was related to that. But I remember an example, I think I mentioned in one of my classes, when I was doing a Russian television, playing Tsar Nicholas, and Rod Steiger, a very good actor, was playing Rasputin. Now, Rod is a wonderful actor, very intense, Have you worked with him, Steiger? No. You know, he is so involved that when the lunch came, or the sandwiches, he was still Rasputin. He was going for the sandwich, and there is still the coffee. And the director, Sidney Lumet, said, Rod, this was not Chekhov, but it's Chekhov's principle. You must drop it, because you could go mad. If you think that you're Rasputin, or you go home at night and you talk to your wife, and he's the Tsarina, you know, you have to stop somewhere and then pick it up again. Because it's unhealthy to be so lost in what you're doing that you lose control. Because it's like a marionette, he used to say. You know, you have to do all the things, do two things at once, and did he ever mention that image to you? And hold the, you know, the puppeteer holds the strings, and the marionette does this, and you have to have this double consciousness to control that you don't do too much, to be in control, and to have your artistic taste controlling, so you don't do too much. Also, every actor needs a director. Even Laurence Olivier, when he did Hamlet in the big film, I felt that he directed himself. Every actor needs a point of view. And if you had gotten this with the neck, and you felt you had it and everything, and someone like Chekhov would, which he said to you, you have it now, forget it. But you need someone out there, you know. Too fast? Much now? Yeah.
Was that an answer to your question or not?
Yes.
Because I wanted to mention, I thought of two other things. One other little exercise that he gave for imagination. And that was to take every single word, even and, but, for, and watch your image. That even the word and will give you an image. It may only be a dot going to there. But to be conscious that not a single word is without an image. So sometimes we would just do that. He would just mention words, and different people would tell their image. But to know that there is nothing that does not have, will not evoke an inner image.
And then,
Ich kann es versuchen zu übersetzen. Er gab die Aufgabe, dass man sich einfache Worte nimmt, und, für, oder, irgend sowas, und versucht auch da zu schauen, ob man ein inneres Bild hat. Ja? Also diese Fähigkeit, bildhaft zu sehen, so weit bringt, dass man selbst bei diesen scheinbar nichtssagenden Worten ein Bild hat.
And then he mentioned a wonderful thing. As you know, he was so interested in Goethe. And one Sunday I hoped to go to Weimar to see his house. And he was very interested in Goethe. And Steiner also, I believe, had strong interest in Goethe. And he said that Goethe said something which we used in our concentration exercises, which of course are related to imagination, because you can't do anything without concentration, and complete concentration. That Goethe said, I think I'm right that it was Goethe and not Chekhov, but Chekhov took it, that if you look at something, if we had a rock on the stage, or a spot, or a flower, you look at it in the concentration, then you observe it as if it was never created. You create it, and then you become part of it. Sort of 3 stages of concentration. And he said, that Goethe said, which is a wonderful concept, spiritually, that you should look at a flower as if you had created it. It's extraordinary, that whatever you see, I mean, who created a rose? It's incredible, that complicated thing. Who created my dog? I have a beautiful dog. And it's a wonderful idea that you look at this and you think, like God, I made this. And that gives you such a knowledge of the object, such a an insight. You look into something when you don't just slide over and take it for granted. And that's part of imagination.
I think your example with other imagination exercises is very good to talk about another theme, which you also didn't talk about this, but it's eurythmy and speech formation. I think when I look at the plan of Darlington Hall, you gave it to me that I could copy it.
Oh yes.
And every morning you had 40 minutes with eurythmy, for example. I think it must have been very important for Chekhov. Yes. Maybe in the later times he didn't do it because he changed his concept of teaching.
No, he didn't change his concept. He simply didn't have the forum in which to do it.
Yeah, but he still wanted.
Yes.
I
Show them how old it is.
Yes.
I
don't know
happened
the
to
year.
find this. I had a very bad fire, so I lost many things last year. But it's very old. This was what we did every day. And I brought it like the Bible, and everybody. It's interesting. We did eurythmy a great deal. I had a particular problem. I'm sorry to speak of myself, but as a young actor, I had this problem. I couldn't be heard beyond the second row, you know. Now I record. People get tired of hearing me. But I couldn't project my voice. When we did the improvisations, I always said to everyone, don't do it just for yourself. Give it to us, into the space. And Chekhov told me, which nearly killed me, he said, he used to call me Hurd. He had, his mother said, nicknames for everyone. As a matter of fact, aside, we had three Mary. We had a Mary Lou, Mary Painsworth, and there was another Mary, Leatherby. So we called them Mary Lou, Mary La, and Mary Lee. He made these names up, you know, because his English got better and better to distinguish. So I was always Hurdy. My name is awkward in Russian, I think. Hurdy. So he said, you will not achieve what you wish to become an actor, which nearly killed me, if you don't work on your voice. So that's when I was introduced to speech made visible, which was the Steiner technique, which was a wonderful concept. Again, thinking of the voice as going on a breath stream and the words. Again, it enlarged the human being. All of his exercises seem to me to enlarge the capacity of the mere human being. You know, as I always say, actors are drowning people. We need all these instruments, tools, wings, help, fire, ice. And he gave us means of finding. And the eurythmy was a wonderful way to free and to find, not just to speak louder or more clearly, but to find a force coming out of you in which the words rested. I had trouble with eurythmy because I had too sharp a sense of humor. Put these large, you know, on my head. And I understood it. And Isha wasn't in those classes. He was a very patient teacher, Australian. And we would make a 5-pointed star. And we'd have this, and we had to pass each other with vowel sounds, which are, as you know, in eurythmy, are defined with a movement. And Mary Lou Taylor, who was small, always got lost. She had this old sound, you know, and she could never find where she was going. Nothing was put out in the dark. And the rods would fall, and we'd crash, and finally we got the 5-point right, you know. But when I would see her coming like she was pregnant, later, I approved of the principle. That's too much fun.
Did you make any experiences in the later times when you could not realize making eurythmy?
He just went through the sounds with me. First, this was in a private lesson, where he really went through the vowels and the consonants and had me pick up some of them. And he said, to begin with, I want you to know these, but I cannot really teach them because I am not a eurythmist. So what he was doing was showing me to the best of his ability, but he kept saying, you really need to study with a eurythmist.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, he went through them with me.
Yeah.
And we used, I mean, certainly in looking for psychological gesture, finding psychological gesture becomes so much easier after even a little acquaintance with eurythmy, with just the sounds, the eurythmical sounds, and the gestures for them.
And if I understood correct, you had the experience that the working with eurythmy helped you to get good words.
Yes, and eventually.
Yes. And what were your experiences of speech formation? I don't know if you studied speech formation. I couldn't understand it. And this plan was called speech formation.
Speech. Well, with the speech was separate from the eurythmy, but it was using the Steiner technique of the imagination of a breath stream, like a river, on which the words came. And like this process I saw with the ball, we would throw the word to each other. We had certain poems that we did, which had certain sounds that needed to be given. In other words, the whole thing, maybe it's making it too simple, is a sort of giving process. Because if you do a performance eventually, and it's just, for instance, for us, if we're just the three of us here, and we don't give a damn about you, and we're busy here, you're not going to get our intention or what we're saying. So I always felt with the acting that there was always this increasing the sense of your radiation, your power, and that affected the voice. So that you got the pleasure of letting people hear what you said. But the way to it was through the speech classes, which helped me doing different consonants, different vowels, but not just for vocal technique. It was a concept, an idea. Everything he did had this really spiritual force, which when I spoke about him, I used to sort of skip because I think it might put people off. But you have to face it. The difference between the actor's studio, which I went to, and Chekhov was just mild.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it was a spiritual energy.
If you talk in this way, I just remember a little letter between Chekhov and Michael Bauer. When Michael Bauer was when Chekhov asked Michael Bauer that he worked with this exercises of speech formation, but he discovered different things. For example, that he said, sometimes I feel that I'm alone and nothing is happening. Sometimes I have the feeling the whole air is moving around. What's the reason for this?
What was the reason?
What is the reason? And then Michael Bauer answered, yes, okay, you are in relation with the spirit of speaking. That was the answer from Michael Bauer. I hope I translated it right. And if you want to get this feeling to have the air moving around you, you have to call the spirit of speech.
Coax it.
Maybe this is one reason, because Chekhov was very able to play in different languages, because he has played in Russian, then in German, then in, I don't know what you speak in Riga.
He spoke Russian.
Russian.
And the actors answered him in their own language.
Excuse me, in America he spoke Russian?
In Latvia and Riga, when he did his performances. I wanted to say about this speech, because I never worked on speech with Chekhov. However, he gave me one thing which made the difference for the rest of my life. and that was that he suggested to me, and this may have been individual, I mean, he had such a way of finding what you needed and what you needed that by the time I knew him, where he worked more individually with actors, in other words, he coached and he taught many private lessons. So he would tailor things to fit what you needed. So it may have been that, but what he said to me was, don't, darling, don't imagine the sound going out from you. Imagine where you want the sound to come from. So that and then I used it in the theater after that, and if I wanted to reach the back row, I let the sound come to me from the back row. So it was this kind of, if I had a gesture for it, it would be that. So it was like this, but it was coming from there, not proceeding from me, which sounds different from what.
It's a little different, but
it I don't know, it accomplishes the same thing.
it's the same idea, that you use the space the way you do with atmosphere, with everything.
Yes.
That the space feeds you, and you feed it.
And not too long ago, I hadn't been on a stage in a long time, and the theater that I was in was a fan-shaped theater, and acoustically very difficult. And on the dress rehearsal, they told me that I wasn't heard in some places. So I started immediately to work on this idea of the sound coming from this fan shape towards me. And by the next morning, everybody heard me.
Yeah. There's another point which I'm interested very much. 2 points. The theme, also Lisa Bückling told an lecture about these exercises like legato, staccato, always words or from the music. We took them from music, and there we have also this word composition. And Chekhov called his analysis of plays composition analysis. Could you tell something about this? How he has been working with you if he tried to make a composition analysis?
Of course, you weren't in a group, that makes it difficult.
Only to the degree that we did that with my roles, my parts, in sense of first the feeling of the whole, but it was a feeling of the whole. And then to find the major climaxes. The larger ones, the most important moments, like it might not be a crescendo, but it would be like a crescendo, the point that one really wanted to make with this character for the audience. And then we would go back into naming sections. One thing, it might be named by an emotion. It might be, let's say, that this whole section was, for some reason, the imagination was lion tamer in a cage, which was a tremendous alertness. I mean, it gave all kinds of things. And that might be the name of that section. And then another section, so that you had your climaxes, you had your next important moments, and then your least important moments, the moments to easily go over. So that it had this feeling of composition.
This is a very special question, but I ask it, maybe you can't answer to it. But do you not remember what happened while you were doing this to you?
describe. It's like an inner movement that has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and a closure. That's all I can say. It's like an inner rhythm.
It's a voyage.
It's a voyage.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a perfect way to say it.
Yeah. It's when he always said that when you come in a play, have the sense of the passage of it before you start, not just your scene, a sort of sense of the whole thing, you know? Now that may not be seen by the audience, but it gives you a sense of the shape, and then, which I mentioned once in a class, that when you have the thing, in my humble way, I did it for this Whistler, because I had so little time to rehearse, and so to help me not feel bits and pieces, before I went to sleep, I flew over the play, which is that point, which helped that I come in, I'm painting, I see the audience, I'm angry, I see the woman I'm going to marry, I go to the trial. In other words, get the shape of the whole thing like an interior muscle going. Don't do all the lines, don't do all the words, but get the shape of the different moods, atmospheres, climax, little climaxes, bigger one. And it's strange if you do that over and over, you have a sense of the whole. I mean, I suppose that's what it comes from. A sense that you have one piece and not little bits.
As we're talking about this yesterday, I said that Chekhov came to enjoy the making films because that was a little piece of art. It had a little beginning, middle, and end, but of course, he had the sense of the whole before he could enjoy the little bits. So that's what you're talking about, because he would, like in a moment, fly over the whole thing. He became very, very skillful at reviewing, not only preceding what was going to be done, but reviewing what had been done. He taught us in class, whatever exercise we would do, he would then say, good. Now, to your understanding, did you achieve the objective of this exercise? And if we were not doing it, but were watching it, we would still, did they achieve? Did they get the atmosphere? Did they not get the atmosphere? Whatever it was, the objective, the imagination, whatever it was that the exercise was for, we learned to ask ourselves, to review. And he was so incredible about that he could do it in an instant. And he always reviewed his own performances afterwards in that flying over way. And trusted that if there was a moment that wasn't quite, that he wanted to improve upon, that it would stop him. That he would be, and he'd look a little more closely at that, and then go on.
It seems to be that these voyages, yes,
Wonderful.
are very close to the music.
But he said, he used a quote, it's in one of the books, that all art, and especially the actor's art, should become akin to music.
We had exercises that, one of the tragedies of my life, of everyone who was with Chekhov, as it was for many people, was the war, because it broke the company, which I thought, at this stage, I would still be with, which would have been, the actor's dream is to have a company like the Ensemble, the Habima, I think is still going, a family where you are developing and you know each other and can do wonderful things because you're a group, an ensemble. And sadly, you see, the war stop that. And I personally have never really felt at home since. I lost my home, you know, which was Chekhov's brilliance and the fact that, I shouldn't say this, but I even feel that we didn't have, thinking back, you know, an extraordinary company of actors. We had some, you know, some very talented, some not so talented. The Actors Studio in New York had everyone. I don't know why we didn't get more. Marlon Brando, Montgomery Clift, I mean, Geraldine Page, everybody. But what Chekhov did with the material he had with us poor members of his company was extraordinary. In other words, he made an ensemble. And the audience is your slave when they see that. They saw this oneness. But we rehearsed for weeks, sometimes years, bits, start, which was a luxury that the commercial theater, which pulls the artist down, can't do, can't offer you. They want quick, cheap results. And that's the danger of practice that Chekhov tried to lead us away from. End of monologue. Monologue.
And one more thing about imagination before we leave that, and that's that Chekhov definitely distinguished between at least two kinds of imagination. One is a visual imagination, at which he was very facile, and the other is a kind of body imagination, that sometimes through your body you get even images, we can call them images, but they are not visual. Things like his, he played one character and his image was eagle with a broken wing. Now that came first through his body, and then once it came through his body, it flashed into a kind of a visual image for him. But even colors, sometimes, you can say what color something is through your body. So it's not, he had us train visual imagery, but he recognized and understood and answered questions about this other kind of imagination, which really proceeds from the body without ever forming itself into a visual image. Do you want to explain that in German?
Yes, not so easy. Eben, dass manchmal Imaginationen hatte, die nicht einen bildhaften Charakter hatten, sondern, I don't know how to describe it. Die Bilder sind aus dem Körper gekommen, aus der Geste gekommen und haben dann zu Begriffen geführt. Oder
Gefühlsbilder.
Bitte?
Gefühlsbilder.
Ja, Gefühlsbildern, ja. Die dann eben mit diesem Wort, was weiß ich, Adler mit gebrochenem Flügel oder sowas.
Er hat den Adler mit dem gebrochenen Flügel, das war ein Bild, was er zuerst im Körper hatte und später ist es ihm dann aufgeblitzt vor Augen, das hat sich dann später erst visuell geformt.
Ja.
Und man kann mit dem Körper Farben sehen, ohne dass man vorher jemals eine bildliche Vorstellung davon hatte.
Und die Qualität, den Geschmack zum Beispiel von Gelb aufzugreifen, zu erleben und körperlich auszuspielen dann. Also über Geschmack, vielleicht ist das ein Wort, the taste of.
So it means he has been working with different senses.
Yes.
Okay, I think one last question. I'm also very interested in this question because I never heard about this question very much. I remember one point when Chekhov talks about, I don't know, well, I don't remember it very well. I try to remember. That if you, for example, have to play a character who is very despotic, how do you say?
Despotic.
Like
that's not his own force, that somebody is standing behind him. makes him
Doppelganger.
fall. You know what I mean?
Doppelganger.
Yes. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, that something took over.
Yes, for example, you worked in your workshop with this robot standing behind somebody who's playing. I know also this exercise sometimes in improvisation education, you try to play in this way that somebody has to follow in what the partner is saying behind him. You say, okay, take this thing, yes, now go out and throw it into the basket or something like that. You see?
Yeah.
And do you have some experiences with this point?
I'm not sure I'm quite clear about that. You feel that when you're playing a character, that something behind you is helping you?
Yes. You understood what
Well,
I mean?
I think there's a concept, particularly for tragedy,
Yes.
that the force is greater than human. A sense of fate is controlling you, and it's not a human choice to be despotic, it is your fate. So working with this image of a huge figure overhead that is the power source for you.
I don't quite understand.
Well,
You?
yes, I do. I don't remember it specifically that Chekhov told us this specifically, but he wanted us to connect with what he called archetypal forces. So that any time, whether it's to be tyrannical, despotic, that it actually exists
Yes.
as a force, and that when we send our thought somewhere, energy follows it. It induces the actual living force. So, but sometimes thinking of a force is too general for people. So whatever image comes to you, whether it's, but also this backspace, something being behind you, was very important for Chekhov, that we do work with what is coming towards us from behind, because that's the future. So I don't remember his actually working with us in terms of a being that was having us do this, but entering into this world where we're really calling for despotism and inducing it in the space around us, and then reacting to it just as we do to atmospheres. That's what happens with going into this realm of emotion, to really, too much?
No.
Okay, he would have us like say, all right, we're going into a palace of sorrow, and here's the threshold, right? The minute we set foot over that threshold, there is a whole world of sorrow. And then you begin to see, your imagination gives you a group of people here in the fore hall that are suffering in some way, whatever it is. The woman is sick. Instantly, these things, you walk through room after room in this palace of sorrow until your whole feeling life begins to increase and increase until it's almost unbearable. And then you, this other consciousness, the puppet, the marionette holder, says, that's enough. And now you make your journey out of this, cross the threshold again, and close the door. Drop it, knowing you can go back there anytime you want. And this is something, when you've experienced many of these emotions to your own breaking point, almost, artistically, imaginatively like this, then you begin to trust that you can call up emotions anytime you want. You've experienced them. So I only say this because it's all to do with imagination. But in every realm, once you direct your thought to what you want, you give a direction, you get an aim, an intention, then you treat it as if it is actually there and it exists, because it does actually exist. We are that kind of psychic creator. We induce these forces to surround us.
I absolutely agree with you. I just didn't understand behind you necessarily, because it can be anywhere.
Yeah.
In you or above you.
I had a character one time who was so strong for me in a play that I did, that she stood always on my left side, I don't know why, and in rehearsals, she'd say, I wouldn't do it that way.
I think it's a different thing, what we are talking about
Yeah.
at the moment. As I remember, for example, he described that Chekhov was talking about the person, was heißt das, besetzt sein? Possessed, which is possessed from a force, you know?
Oh, yeah.
But who not wanted to treat people, but because she's possessed by a force. And I have the opinion that it was behind it. I think you know what I mean, yes?
Well, I just remember, and I think I associate this with his approach to stylistic variation in from, say, comedy, where he would be possessed by a little being somewhere, perhaps, and in tragedy, possessed by a huge figure overhead that weighed down.
But you can choose any image. I mean, the behind or above or whatever it is. I had a strange experience once. In Connecticut, we had one not as beautiful as in England, but we had a theater where we could book it. You know, you could say, I want to rehearse or I want to do exercise. So I booked it because it was so busy, very late at night, like 11:30. This was in the country. And I did an exercise in not wishing an image. It's a form of meditation. And I had also read that Isadora Duncan, a famous actress, dancer, she would not always invent a movement. She would wait and listen to her body, listen to the space, and suddenly something would happen, you know, would come to her. So I thought, I want to try this, you know, little me. So I went, I had this space in the theater, and you know, I frightened myself. Honestly, it was very interesting. I stayed in the empty space with the steps up to the theater and waiting to see what would come to me out of the air, out of the imagination, out of this world which I believed in of independent images. And suddenly a whole theme woke up. You spoke of despotic, I felt immediately I was this strange, I don't know, Ivan the Terrible, I don't know who I was, strange king who has been deserted by me. I didn't think of it, it just happened. And from the space in the distance came this army coming into my country, my palace, you know, and it got so real. And I began to speak some strange language. I don't know what it was, you know. I really got very involved, and it got a little frightening. It was a thrilling experience. So I got a little frightened by what I had awakened. And then I went up the little paths, you know, with the trees at night and dark, and I felt that people were watching me. And I thought, am I going mad? You know, I kept thinking there's something in the trees. I got uncomfortable. And the next day, I asked Misha, I said, you know, I had this strange experience. And I was working on an exercise on imagination. Well, he said, you must always control it. Because, you know, that way madness lies. If you become Ivan the Terrible and you can't get back to your lunch, you know, you've got to hold on. But I said, when I came up the path, I felt that people, it was dark. Something was looking at me. And he had this wonderfully deep, mystical nature. And he said, of course, you know, as if it was quite logical. He said, my dear Hurd, he said, there are spirits in the night that you are not supposed to be awake. They are watching from the trees and everything. And you know, I absolutely believe it. I never went down there at night. You know, there was a man that you felt had seen an angel. Do you remember he had that inspiration in Hamlet, I think it was? He knew these other worlds, and which is in Mahler's book. He told me that story of going up in the mountains in Russia to a famous mystic, a man who had been in a cave, I don't know what, a great holy man, of which Russia once had so many. And he went, this equally brilliant man, he was modest, but he went, you know the story. And he talked to him, and I said, well, what did you say? He said, I don't know. He said, we laughed. He said something struck them. Here were these two brilliant men. It showed the relaxation. They were laughing about something for quite a while. But he had a strong mystical nature, but he never forced anthroposophy or his religious points of view on us. There were evening lectures we could go to if we wished. He felt, as you mentioned, that one should be ready, not have it imposed, which is true, because if you're not ready for any kind of mysticism, you have to wait till the meeting is arranged somewhere. End of monologue. I never get a laugh on that.
I think if nobody has a question, I think we should finish here because time is so late.
I have lots more to say if you're not sound asleep after our break.
You said just one question.
Yeah, sorry.
Well, there was a point that I wanted to make very briefly about the power of this reviewing, flying over your work after you've done it, that is particularly critical for film and television today, because most of your directors do not direct the actor on the set. So after each take, the actor needs to fly over their last take to find out where they missed the moment, because the director is busy with technical problems. So in teaching actors today who are preparing for film and television, it's very important to teach them to do this reviewing your work process. Yeah.
It's very hard to do it.
Okay, then I think, say.